Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and we do, every week I say, we have a very special guest, but this one is not only special, but a very old friend. Welcome to the program, Wade Pursell. Say hello to the people, Wade.
Thank you, Jeff. Good morning.
Wade,
hello, people.
Yeah, Wade is the CFO of SM Energy, which is a public company based in Denver. But I have to tell just a personal anecdote. I told Wade before we started recording that I was writing down some notes for this, and I wrote down, I can't believe Wade and I have known each other for 24 years. And then I realized, oh, darn, it's 34 years. And we don't want to admit it. And okay, so I've got 1,000 Wade stories because we've been friends for so long, but we worked at the same place right out of school, public accounting, and I was I think 2 years behind Wade, and so that made him my boss, which was hysterical, but it was very serious at the time, very, very serious at the time. The 25-year-old leading the 23-year-old, it was very important. But actually, he was a great boss then, and he's still a great boss today for all kinds of people that are blessed to be under his leadership, and we'll get into some of that. And I know this is very unique today because we have a guy who's a large shareholder in a public company, which is very unique. And so anyway, there's a lot of unique things about Wade's journey. But Wade, again, thank you for being here. And we always try to open with the same question, just to give some context. Tell us about where you grew up, what that was like, what your family was like, maybe if there was a faith component, that sort of thing to your upbringing.
Good place to start. Of course, I grew up in a little small town in eastern Oklahoma called Muldrow, Oklahoma. I didn't grow completely up there. I was there until I think I was 13 years old. So my dad was a pastor of a very small Free Will Baptist church there. Have one brother, a younger brother, a couple of years younger than me, and my mom. And so I grew up there. So I grew up in the church, very, very rooted in the church. Incredible blessing, I think. There's pros and cons to everything. Jeff, I know you know there are pros and cons to being a preacher's son.
Yeah.
But the pros way outweigh the cons.
Yes, they do.
It's wonderful to grow up there. And then we moved, when I was 13, we moved over to Conway, Arkansas, which is just north of Little Rock. Decent sized town for Arkansas. I think it was around 30,000 when I lived there. And my dad became the state youth director for Free Will Baptist there. So he continued to preach. So I continued to be a preacher's son. And he ran the camp. So that was a wonderful experience for a teenager, getting to be part of that. And, from my upbringing, I certainly was rooted in the word early, relationship with Jesus early, appreciated very much the importance of the church from a very early age. And pretty strong work ethic. We worked really hard at the camp, and we never had a lot of money, as you might imagine. So I had the pleasure of working my way through college and paying for that. And they're in Conway, actually, a little school called University of Central Arkansas. Got an accounting degree there and a computer science degree, and was able to get on with Arthur Anderson in Houston right after that, which is where I met you, and had a wonderful experience there. I'll just keep going if you want me to, and we'll just summarize.
I think
that's kind of the growing up phase.
We were talking earlier that in this day and age, I don't know what the average number of employers is for a full career. And thankfully ours aren't over yet, but I think you've only had 3 employers that I'm aware of. So
that's correct.
And those transitions. So this is actually going to be kind of fun because those transitions we were talking earlier were really sort of God-led and unique. So maybe you can talk about the first one.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, it's fun to look back and really really see the two big moves I made and how the timing was so fortunate. Clearly I was blessed when they occurred. So I was at Anderson for I guess 9 years. And I think most people listening to this probably have heard of Enron, I would assume. And I was I loved working at Anderson when I was there, and really developed a love for the energy industry while I was there. All of my clients were energy related, and at one point in time, one of those clients that I had really grown up with was contemplating going public, and the CFO was about to retire. So everything kind of lined up, and he was able to convince me to leave Anderson and be part of that going public process, and then taking over the reins as CFO. And that was a hard decision. And I think I've told you before, I was kind of shamed by a lot of the partners at Anderson. How could I ever consider such a risky move? The rest is history, right? A couple of years later, Anderson's gone, and it was again very fortunate timing for me in that move. And then I'll just, obviously, it's hard to, I know I'm very, very rooted in the scripture, and I do not believe that in prosperity gospel or anything like that, but I do believe that God's hand is in certain things, and he does what he wants to do. And sometimes, we're blessed by what he decides to do. And then I have always felt since the early days compelled to return a large percentage of that back to him, and typically through the church. I very, very, very much believe in the power of the church, and it's the body of Christ. It's meant to be the light on the hill. It's meant to be a place for brothers and sisters to commune and grow and be disciples and all of that. So that has been my thing. And from that point forward, it's been another blessing, and a wonderful way to do that has been through working at public companies, as you mentioned. So we went public, and that being a CFO, most of my compensation from that point forward became stock, and that's just the way it works. And so the benefits of being able to give stock to the church has been a great thing for me. I've just on a very disciplined basis, once or twice a year, just kind of trimmed that, and it's been there's big tax advantages to that. There's I have to watch windows and things like that, but it's just been a wonderful way to give, especially when the stock is being appreciating.
Yeah.
And, through the years, I've been blessed by that also. So that's kind of a side note on that. And then if you want me to finish on the next transition.
Well, let me pause there just for a second, because so I think that's a good opportunity to just unpack what you just said. There's a couple of important things in there. So I think one of the, I was telling Wade before we started recording that one of the very unique things, we haven't had that many public company folks on the podcast. And I think this is very interesting. We'll also get into some management things where he's able to do some biblical things inside the company. But I think this giving piece is very important. I think anybody who's been involved with a public company knows that there is, you certainly know this better than I have. Isn't there pressure, Wade, to always hold on to the stock, like up, down, whatever? You're on the management team, you're in the C-suite, like you can't ever sell. And so somewhere along the line, you had to know, you had to respect the church enough. I know you're a very church-centric guy. I think a great percentage I know of your giving goes to the local church. You're super involved in the local church. I think that's very unique and special. But also this idea of giving appreciated stock. I bet there's half the people listening to this that don't even know that you can do that and avoid the capital gain.
Yeah.
So we can talk about that a bit, but I think you're being able to give it. So like, I'm picturing this conversation that you've had to have with these management teams in these two different public companies you've been with, where you're giving them your form about filing, because all this stuff's public. It's going to be known to the public exactly how many shares you disposed of, and it looks maybe to the public like you're selling or something. Why are you selling? The investment community might ask. The management doesn't want that heat. How has that gone for you?
I will tell you that That's a great question. I probably have not thought about it in that way enough. That I think it's been a huge blessing. Look, everything you said is accurate. When we sell stock, you have to file the form within a few days, and so everyone sees it immediately, and it's never a comfortable question from an investor. When somebody sells stock, then they must know something, right? And it's never well received. And same thing with the CEO and the other executives don't like to see you do it either. So for me, the ability to give it away has been a big positive in that area also, because I will tell you, I think I can tell you honestly, no one has ever asked me why I gave away stock versus I know they would ask if they saw me selling it. When you're giving it away, it's filed differently. It looks different. For a long time, you didn't even have to file it immediately. Those rules have changed recently where you need to now. But no one has ever asked that question on giving. It looks very different, and I think people appreciate that you're giving something away. It is also a witness. I don't ever really.
That's where I was going to.
Don't ever really think of it that way.
Yeah, it is.
Everyone on the team has to see it, and they see that I'm giving back to God, to the church. So.
Yeah, that's what I think is so cool about it, is not only is it a tax smart thing that most people don't know about.
It's incredibly tax smart. I mean, no one pays the gain is gone. I mean, no,
Right.
You don't have to pay it. The church just receives the fair value and is able to sell that day. And that's just, it's a great tax advantage that I hope continues.
Well, and I think one of the cool things about you is I know you've done it for decades. And there's something about that routine of it. How do you just think? I know you and I have had these conversations over the many years, but maybe just share a little bit about how you think about the idea of giving, just from a biblical standpoint or from your own outlook.
Yeah,
I think if you want to go there, however you want to unpack that.
I don't mind. It's not. This is just me, right? I mean,
Yeah.
through the years, I try to. I typically do it twice a year.
Yeah.
Once early in the year and once late in the year. During open windows, and I typically just try to. This is actually a good story because I can't think of a year where it didn't happen this way. I just try to. My income's extremely volatile because so much of it's equity related. I just try to predict what it might be and look at last year and then start with a number like 10% and try to beat that. Yeah. And try to throw a number out that's going to be where the puck's going, not at the puck.
Right.
And typically what happens is I feel like I'm chasing it later in the year because typically God blesses, and some years are not like that, but most years they are, and it's nothing more than that. I just try to keep trimming large chunks of equity and not get too legalistic on the percentage, but just kind of use that as a start, and then just try to go, at least go well above that. And that's nothing more than that.
But I think that's important because even though I know that's like a routine for you, that seems simple to you. I think that's going to be very helpful to some people maybe in the same situation where like, am I even able to do it? Are the optics going to look bad? There's somebody listening to this at a public company that's kind of thinking about doing this, and they think maybe they're the only one. And so I think that's really helpful, the way you think through that. Okay. So let's continue the story. That's really good. Now I'll never forget this transition out of the first company into the second one. And on this podcast, we always try to have a setback story because nobody wants to hear up and to the right. You and I don't want to hear our buddies talk about up and to the right because we know the truth. There's always pain.
Sure.
And I remember it vividly for you. Of course, it was even more vivid for you. But maybe let's go there a little bit with, if you don't mind, about that next transition, because I know that was a painful experience that obviously turned out well, but in the moment you didn't know.
It was very painful, and I'll I won't name any names to protect the innocent, but
yeah, I know what you mean.
It was a situation where this happens, right? This is And it was a situation where I like to summarize it as getting caught between, kind of like getting caught in the middle of a divorce, if I could say it that way. It was. We had a CEO who'd run the company and had done an amazing job, and that was my boss. And he stepped back and made someone else the CEO, but he hung around as the executive chairman on the board. And they had differences on strategic thinking. And those differences were okay until they weren't. And things started going south, and it became a very, very ugly breakup with the firing of the CEO and the former stepping back in. And of course, I was in the middle of that and supporting my new boss along the way. And it just became long story short, it just became was made very clear to me that it would probably be best if I move along as well, and just to clean the sheet. And that's not unusual, but it was very painful at the time because I loved who I worked with and loved the company. But I guess reflecting on that time, though, again, I'll get to the financial part in a minute, which I always hesitate to go straight there. But just the fact that I was being uprooted from something I loved was hard. But if I really reflect on it honestly, though, I remember really spending time in prayer when that happened. Like so many of us, Psalm 23 bubbled up. I think that's kind of a standard. I just remember it like it was yesterday, and I remember an incredible amount of peace that surprised me. I was very surprised how peaceful I felt about the whole thing when it was going down. And Jeff, we had just had our kids were really young, and it was going to. I just started thinking of the positives of it. This is an opportunity to kind of hang out for a bit and spend time with them. They're 5 and 3, and they took care of me financially so that was a blessing. And I remember having the conversations with all the folks that work for me that I was very close to, and they were all mad and upset. I remember that. And I just remember not being that way, and having the opportunity to kind of live out what I always said to them, and what I hope they believe today is that we're not defined by our job at all. Never be defined by your job. That's not who you are. And so that it actually turned out as a huge blessing, because what happened is again, I said I was going to take some time off. This was June 2008. Oil was $140. So you can imagine where the stocks were. This forced me and enabled me to get rid of all of that stock at very high prices. And I think we all know what happened in September 2008 when the financial crisis hit. And so it was, again, that was just kind of a, wow, that I don't deserve that. I don't know why that timing happened that way, but it did. And then not only that, but I wanted to take some time off, but the headhunter called immediately and said this company in Denver called SM Energy, St. Mary at the time, had been looking for a CFO for about a year, and they were being very picky and patient. And I needed to look at that because he thought I would be a great fit for them. And I didn't want to look, but I did it just to appease him, really. And man, it just from the first time I met the CEO then to coming to Denver, and it just felt like, wow, this move is the right move, and this is where God wants me. And it truly has been. I mean, not just the job. The job's been fantastic, and the culture and the people, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But just the moving here and back to the church, plugging into a church here has been 100% a God thing. I mean, he sent me here for that church. There's zero doubt in my mind. And
wow.
From becoming a deacon to an elder, and then teaching, and then preaching occasionally, and it's just been an amazing growth experience for me. So that was, that's the highlights of that move. If you want, I'll talk a little bit about the job here. And
let me pause there just for a second, because there are two things that popped into my brain. The first one was I'm just gonna is basically Philippians 4:7, which talks about the when we're following Christ, he'll give us the peace that goes beyond understanding. So I love that story about how it was really, I mean, you were losing your job. And the one thing I know about you, you talked about the hard work and that sort of work ethic that your probably dad instilled in you and parents at a young age.
Yep.
But the other thing I know about you is that you're a very loyal person. And I remember I've been the beneficiary of that. You're still putting up with me after all these years. So Exhibit A over here, but I remember talking to you at that time, and I remember like you were just distraught about like leaving anybody in the lurch. Like you know, I'll go down with the ship if I have to. You know, like you know, and so that piece about leaving and not knowing where to go. I mean. You had no idea. I remember. And the fact that came along, and then you get to look in the rearview mirror about how it was all meant to be is amazing. The other story that came to mind is you know, in the furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You know how they escaped the cauldron, if you will, like. Burning on your heels is Anderson blowing up, and in the financial crisis and oil tanking, and you know,
that's a rough time. Yeah,
I mean, it was so that was all part of it too. There were some other factors kind of going on there, but anyway, it's just amazing. I think I am convinced that those two things are not disconnected.
Yeah,
this sort of story of the consistent giving, consistent walk with God. I know we all wander in our own ways, but
absolutely
consistent trying, coming back, keep consistent with that. And then God is so generous with us. And I love that you talked about the peace, because we were talking earlier, you know, obviously it's not just he doesn't promise us money if we follow him, but he does promise us things like peace.
Yep.
And we were talking, we just happen to live in a you know, capitalistic society where if you're a servant leader, sometimes things can go well economically. It's not true of other people around the globe. So
It's true.
anyway, those are just amazing deals. And so, okay, so we get to Denver. You're fortunate to be in a good culture at a public company, which is not always the case.
It's not.
So maybe take us through, okay, now we're in Denver, it's 08. Take us through the rest of that sort of that piece, the professional piece.
Yeah, no, that it's just been a huge blessing to be here. I've got to work with executive teams that have very high integrity. Some of them Christian, some of them not, but just all very very good people. And the culture thing that I've really enjoyed the most, especially the last several years, has been, and I mentioned this to you, has been the ability to really lead and teach. I would say biblical principles.
Yeah.
I know that makes people cringe being in a public company, but in a way that can be creative and not in the face. I think I hope most people listening to this realize that you know, and I've really seen it developing. You know, we've kind of taken it on ourselves as an executive team to create our own leadership program here. And creating that and then getting to teach a lot of it has allowed me to kind of weave in tons of biblical principles without quoting the verse, right? And it's really not that hard. It's kind of shocked me how easy it's been, and very I don't know, it's very encouraging to me. So that's been really cool.
Well, what's an example of that?
Yeah, so an example would be, well, here's an example. You know, if I could give you, you know, if I could give a tip to someone that I wish I would have known earlier in my life, I'll give you two examples. This one, this little simple book called Tyranny of the Urgent. I don't know if you've heard this, Jeff. You heard of this?
Yeah.
Read this at the beginning of every year. Yeah. It's tiny. It only takes like 30 minutes to read. But the point of it is living a life that's proactive versus reactive.
Yeah.
And it's
all I can think of is email.
It's so simple.
They're all the same font.
Yes. So most of us, you know, if we're honest, live our lives reacting to the urgent. And It's worse now than it's ever been, because it's not just email, right? It's texting.
You're exactly right.
You name it.
You're right.
And we allow that to take a place of importance equal to, whatever. So the point of that is and this is biblically based.
Exactly.
Talking about Jesus as our example, but we have baked that into the leadership program, and Covey has some material that's similar. You can find these principles that work. Again, it's all biblical, and it comes down to identifying what is important in your life. What are your roles in life that matter, right? Is it, what's my role here? What's my role as a father look like? What's my role as a husband look like? And on, pick those roles, and then, set up your day, set up your week proactively doing something extraordinary in those areas, and really just putting some boundaries around the other stuff. You can do that in a way, you kind of extend that in leadership, and we talk about strategic perspective being a core competency. And what that means is knowing your mission, knowing the mission of the company, being passionate about it, but also knowing your mission in life. And I don't tell them what their mission needs to be, but we talk about how important it is. You have to have a mission, and that you have to know what the end in mind looks like for you. And you have to be proactive about that in your life. That's an example. We talk a lot about collaboration and servant leadership, and that simply being focusing on others, not being humble, but focusing on others and their success. And that's what Jesus talks about all the time, right? So I like, my best example is my recipe for relationship is listen, learn, and lean in. And I wear it on my wrist because I forget. It's listening to the other person first, and then learning about them, and then leaning in and doing something about it. So we teach that as servant leadership. And if anybody notices on my wrist, it has Matthew 22 on it, because that's Jesus saying, love others as yourself. And that's kind of the recipe for doing that. It's things like that. It's just not, it doesn't take a lot of effort if you know the Bible, I guess is what I'm saying. So I've really enjoyed that.
So good, man. The story that comes to my mind is Ken Blanchard. He wrote all those business leadership books, and then he became a Christian, and he wrote that book Lead Like Jesus. And
right.
And I think it was in the preface or something. It was like, he goes, I wrote all these business books, and then I became a Christian. I read the Bible, and I realized all the best business principles came out of the Bible.
So great. Yeah.
So it's just the truth. That's how God set the world up to operate best. So all you're doing is taking the best practices that he set the world up and offering them, and you don't have to use the chapter and verse.
It's the as Tim Keller called it, it's the owner's manual. I mean, it's just the owner. The Bible's the owner's manual. I mean, it just is.
Exactly. Okay, so now I think that's a good segue into so God is real. Again, you're a very church-centric guy, which I really like, and it's very unique. Because sometimes people get involved in all kinds of things. You're a very focused guy. And I say, so let's talk about that. So this teaching you do, I think that's pretty cool. The parallels. I have a feeling there's a lot of these parallels, because I know you spend a lot of effort and time on teaching at your local church too. But talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's been a kind of a game changer for me. One of the biggest things that God did for me in plugging me into this church was the opportunity that I did not want to teach. And as the opportunities presented themselves in the class that we attended, I felt very almost shoved into it by God internally. And once I began to do it, I frankly couldn't get enough of it. And the thing it did for me, Jeff, is I thought I was living in the Word. But once I started teaching and just going deeper and deeper and deeper, it was just mind blowing. I totally believe, and God says He does it, that He increases. We pray, increase my desire for the Word, your Word, and love for your Word, and that's been the case for me. The more I've taught, the more I've gone deeper, the more I've wanted to do, and that's that. If I could just summarize the Bible and life, it really is Psalm 1. That's kind of become my. How do you live your life? Just look at Psalm 1. I mean, it's the gateway of the Psalms. It's the gateway to the Bible. It's just so simple. Again, it describes life. There's two paths, and they're both paths of influence. You pick one. There's only two. And one of them is being influenced by the world. That's the walking, standing, and then sitting with sinners, or it's being influenced by the word. So it's world or word. And the word is, meditating on it day and night. And you become the tree with the streams, and you're bearing fruit, and it's life. It's the definition of life. So that means meditate on the word. And if you're in the word every morning, then that's going to influence your life. If you're not, it's so simple. If you're not, the world's going to influence you. And that's just the bottom line. So that's been a big deal to me, is the teaching. So
I think that's it's it's so simple, but it's also powerful. So maybe unpack that a little bit, how you talked about again, looking back in the rearview mirror of this, where God's been faithful, and you had that really difficult management situation in Houston before you moved to Denver. And as you look back, maybe reflect a little more on that. So when you talk about your own mission, I know you're teaching people to have a mission and that sort of things. How do you sort of see your mission clarifying?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's not always been this way. But it became clear. I can't remember exactly when, but it as I was thinking about, well, what is my personal mission, right?
Right.
Where do I go next? What do I want to do? And it's real. Again, we overcomplicate things, don't we? It's like if you just stop and say, well, what would God tell me my mission should be? Well, he kind of did, right? I mean, he really clarified things nicely for us. It's like, just let me clear this up for you. Love God and love others, right? Love God, love others. That's it. Love God, love others. So that, it sounds oversimple, but that I just said everything I need to do needs to kind of come out of that. But what does that mean? I pray about opportunities when they come up, and when this opportunity came up, it felt like that's where God was leading me. And when I go there, I need to have a mentality of who is this going to be a place that he wants me to be to love him and love others? And I try to ask myself that most days, most years.
Love it. So, when we kind of get to the end of this podcast, one of the things that we always try to ask is just some practical tips for somebody behind you on this journey. And look, maybe it's some people that are in public companies and aren't quite sure what they can do, what they can't do, whatever it is, or maybe it's just for everybody. I don't want to lead the witness too much here, but what would be some practical tips for somebody behind you? Maybe what you would have, the 30-year-old Wade would have wished he knew, kind of thing. Just whatever the Spirit brings to mind. What might you share with us?
Yeah, I'll bring up one just because it tags on to something we just talked about. And one would be don't assume that you can't be bold. I really wish I would have believed that earlier in my life, especially working in a public company. It means you can be creative. Don't be in people's face, and don't be overt. But there are ways to be very bold. I'll say it that way. So that's number one. The other thing is just kind of hit on it. I mean, if I were rewinding me and saying, man, I wish I would have been doing that when I was younger. I go back to the Psalm 1 thing. I would have started it. I would have made sure, no matter what, that I start every morning in the Word. And it doesn't and that's the other thing. It doesn't. I used to think that meant, it has to be at least 30 minutes of quiet time.
Right.
And that's great, but it doesn't have to be. It just needs to be something. It can be one verse for 5 or 10 minutes. In fact, some of the best days, that's what it is, because that you're much more likely to hang on to that the rest of the day. Just anything. And then here's the next one I wish I would have done earlier. It's be in the Word, and then of course we respond to the Word by praying. So pray what you've heard, but then look at your schedule and pray for everyone that you're going to be engaged with that day.
Yeah.
And I don't mean pray for you and your ability to do whatever. I mean, pray for them.
Yeah.
And the days I remember to do that are very different. I can tell you that, especially when it's people that you may not be looking forward to meeting with, hedge funds, whoever, that I prayed for you this morning, Jeff. And it changed it for me. It totally changes my interactions that day. So that would be one of my biggest.
Ooh, yeah. I think I generally pray for my meetings, but I'm probably praying for myself.
Me too. And wisdom.
Yeah.
May I glorify you in that?
Yeah, right. Like, how about let me be sensitive to what's going on in that person's life, right? Is that kind of where you're going?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Totally different. Yeah.
Oh man, that's so good. What a perfect place to wrap it up. Well, Wade, can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with us today. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner podcast. Go to our website, generousbusinessowner.com, and sign up for the newsletter and pass this podcast on to a friend that you think it would bless. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Take care. God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.